We would like to welcome you to our second discussion as part of our series of dialogues on the polycrisis of democracy. So, as we said in our first dialogue, the idea is to understand the crisis that democracy is facing today. So also to be able to maybe find some ideas progressive ideas to improve democracy in today's world. I'm not going to take too long, so I'm going to introduce you to the speaker of today's event. His name is Dr. Ellison Tjirera. Dr. Ellison teaches sociology at University of Namibia, Windhoek, for over a decade as a senior. Tjirera has been associated with the university-based think tank, the Institute for Public Policy Research, as well as the Ministry of Gender, Equality and Child Welfare. Tjirera holds a PhD in sociology from the University of Witwatersrand here in Johannesburg, and his academic interest includes urban studies, social movements, gender studies, governance, and post-apartheid societies. So what we want to understand from Dr. Ellison, today's presentation is, the struggle that is happening in Namibia for reparations, in the context of the post-genocidal genocide society that Namibia is. So Dr. Tjirera will help us understand who is fighting for reparations, what are the discourse, how are the movements organized, and also maybe try to touch a bit, the questions of inequality in Namibia, and frame it in the overall context of the struggle for human rights and also the struggle for democracy. Dr. Tjirera, welcome. The floor is yours now.
Thanks for your kind introduction, and good afternoon to the listeners. As introduced, my name is Ellison Tjirera, and I will talk to you about the first genocide of the 20th century, the Namahero genocide of 1904 to 1908. And I think through a series of interventions that I will make, you will get to realize that probably this particular issue of the Namibian society seem to have tested democracy and what democracy can deliver in such a context. So I've got a short presentation that I will share with you with some points that I would then try and talk to. All right, so Fredson asks me to prepare some series of interventions on democracy in the context of a Namibian post-genocide society. So that's my outline. Firstly, I will just talk to you about the first genocide of the 20th century, which is the Namahero genocide, the genocide that I personally got to learn about only after high school. So I think just from that very basic anecdote, you get a sense of what gets to be included in history books and what is left out. So and I kid you not that I only learned about this genocide only after I finished high school. So for the longest, the issue of genocide was not even in our history books. So even though I did history up to the 10th grade, I didn't come across the Hero Nama genocide. So probably people who are not from Namibia or who are from other countries would, probably not be able to know what this is all about. So, and then my second intervention would be about what this genocide somewhat has produced. And this somewhat exhibit itself as some form of structural violence, and it relates directly to the issue of land inequality. And then from there, of course, the issue of genocide now has become part of the public discourse, part of the public imagination, since negotiation between Namibia and Germany started, I think, back in 2016. So we have gotten to a point where we being, the Namibians on this side and the German government, try and find some closure to this dark chapter of our history. So I would say a little bit about that whole process of negotiating genocide. Again, that process um, somewhat reveals the limits of representative democracy, and perhaps also signal the crisis that I think democracy or democracies across the world have been facing. And then after that, I would talk about the Joint Declaration briefly, which came out of the negotiating process between Germany and Namibia. And then I would offer a few concluding remarks. All right, let's get into it. So the Tjirera genocide of 1904 to 1908 was, as we probably all know, perpetuated by the German Schutztruppe. Again, for those who don't know much about the Namibian history, from 1884 to around 1915. So that's a period of about probably 30 years. Namibia was under the German colonial rule. So after the Berlin Conference of 1883, 1884, Namibia was given to Germany as a colony. So now this genocidal war resulted in about 80 to 50% of our Herero and Nama people killed. And to a great extent, this war was chiefly about confiscation of cattle and land dispossession. And I think here, in terms of structural violence, we would realize how this particular historical phase of the Namibian history continue to define things such as land ownership patterns in contemporary Namibia. So that now takes us to what I call the enduring structural violence, which is expressed through land inequality. So before the genocidal war of 1904, I mean, it started towards the end of 1904, around October there was large-scale land grabbing, which was sanctioned by the German colonial administration. So around 1903, the German imperial commissioner by the name of Theodor Ludwig declared that 75% of the land owned by Africans had to be sold to Europeans, and that the remaining 25% be proclaimed as native reserves. So I hyphenate sold quite deliberately, because I mean, during that period of unequal power distribution that usually characterized the colonial period, perhaps the issue of legitimate and legal land transaction could not have taken place. But of course, if you go back in the history books, you hear about things such as land being sold. But of course, the conditions under which the land was sold is quite very suspect. Okay. Now, you would realize that the previous slides I mentioned that this colonial governor made a proclamation that 75% of the land must be sold from Africans to Europeans. And now in a post-colonial period or post-independence period, you have got statistics that seem to mimic the very disposition of more than 100 years ago. So in a post-independence dispensation, it appears that the policies and programs that were aimed or that are aimed at land redistribution have not been able to address historical injustices that continue to define contemporary land ownership patterns. So in 2018, the Namibia Statistics Agency released a report on land statistics in terms of who owns how much of the land. And these statistics reveal that previously advantaged farmers or Namibians, who can be read as whites, own about 70% of freehold agricultural land. And that compares with about 16% that is owned by previously disadvantaged farmers who are blacks. So, I mean, you realize the kind of almost perfect match of these statistics, with what happened more than 100 years ago, that it appears that things have not changed that much in terms of land redistribution or, all our efforts that were aimed at dealing with these historical injustices have not yielded desirable results. But of course, there are other factors that account for that, such as elite capture, issues around corruption and the like. So it's just not that things have not changed because nothing has happened. I mean, resources have been put aside to try and deal with this land inequality, but it appears that the redistribution process is riddled with a lot of other interests that sometimes have stood in a way of really dealing with this issue of land inequality decisively. Now let's move quickly to negotiating genocide. And again, what I would like to emphasize is that the issue of genocide was chiefly about land dispossession and also cattle dispossession. So a lot of things that have happened after independence seem to suggest that the slow pace at which we have moved in terms of negotiations around genocide also mimic the slow pace at which we have tried to deal with the question of land. So formal negotiations started around 2016, and the actors in terms of who represents who, from the Namibian side, you really have had there's been a cabinet technical committee that has been appointed by government. There was no representation in terms of the affected communities when it comes to the constitution of this technical committee. There has been a representative from the affected communities, but over time, what has become apparent is that their involvement, to a great extent, has been somewhat cosmetic. So much so that in April 2023, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights criticized Namibia and Germany for excluding the affected communities. But nonetheless, these negotiations that started around 2016 led to what is called a joint declaration. So joint declaration on genocide between Namibia and Germany. And this joint declaration was brought before Parliament or before the National Assembly. And it was thoroughly rejected before it could even get to a point where it could be discussed at any length. So as we speak, this joint declaration has not been adopted because it has a lot of issues that particularly the affected communities are not happy with. One of which is the issue of involvement, and also the language of the whole declaration. So if you get a chance to read the declaration, it does not even, for example, once mention the word reparation. The language is phrased in concepts such as reconstruction and reconciliation and all those kind of stuff. But being that as it may, there have been attempts of trying to address issues that were raised by the affected communities, and there is not yet any finality when it comes to the contents of this declaration. One of the things that is probably worth mentioning was that the declaration did not even admit that what happened around 1904 to 1908 was genocide. So the declaration speak about genocide with a qualification that says genocide from today's perspective. And of course, that particular phrasing has been critiqued. And last time I checked, there has been some movements towards accepting that indeed what happened was genocide. In 2023, the Nama Traditional Leaders Association, as well as our Herero Traditional Authority and the Landless People's Movement, which is a political party represented in Namibian Parliament, filed a lawsuit against the Joint Declaration. And the argument was that it is an illegal document because one of the things is that the affected communities are not going to be compensated directly. So that is, I think, still before the courts, and we are still waiting as to what will happen. Okay. Oh, I'm already at my concluding remarks. So I'm clearly a man of few words. Now, when it comes to what has happened over time, it becomes very clear that the effects of the genocide continue to linger on in contemporary Namibian society. And again, I will go back to the issue of land. There continues to be this land inequality, and those who suffered land dispossession continue to be squeezed in very small land parcels across the country, particularly in the central part of the country, in the south, and in the central east. And this land inequality remains a constant reminder of this genocide, and it constitutes enduring structural violence, in the sense that these are somewhat issues that are at the structural level of the Namibian society, and they are also linked to, say, our constitution in this instance. So we have got a property protecting constitution, so right to property. If you read the constitution of Namibia, you look at Article 16. It doesn't, really allow for some kind of drastic steps when it comes to redistribution of land. So land can only be, expropriated, subject to fair compensation, and in the public interest. In the public interest, I don't know what it is. I think it's not defined. And if you look at the right to property, I mean, this is a very fundamental aspect of a democratic system, So, but at the same time, you have got an enduring problem that continue to confront the society. So what do you do in that instance? So I think these are difficult questions that we have to think about and interrogate. But at some point, you realize that democracy and all its principles have some limits. And when it comes to these structural questions, that require some kind of drastic interventions. Democracy is somewhat unable to deliver. And I'm talking about a particular strand of democracy, which seemed to be also very prevalent, the majoritarian democracy, where you say those who constitute the largest portion of the population must somewhat have the last say, if you like. So the issue of genocide and the related land question um, affected particular groupings of the Namibian society. And these groupings um, happen to be not the majority ethnic group. And over time, you get a sense that probably because of that, things have not been moving at a pace that they should move. Perhaps because they do not matter politically. So I'm talking about these groups that were affected by genocide and the attendant land inequality. Maybe they don't matter politically. And here in Namibia, comes November 27th, we are going to the polls for parliamentary and presidential elections. And you get a sense that democratic systems for the largest part have been about, electoral processes and electoral democracy that seem to ignore other fundamental problems that affect the society. At the beginning of my remarks, I mentioned that I only learned about genocide after high school. That is, I think, very unfortunate. And you would realize that the history that has been recorded in our textbooks that continue to be taught seem to be a particular history that legitimizes the majority ethnic group which is in power. So, for those of you who also have been to Windhoek, probably you must have been to the Independence Memorial Museum. And you look at how different phases of the Namibian history are showcased, and then you will get a sense also that there is a particular deliberate attempt at making some historical aspects of the history invisible while privileging others. So you get a sense that history is then used to lay claims to the state and the like. So, I mean, I can go on and on about that, but that's not my intention. But memory politics becomes a very contested terrain in terms of who is deserving of what the state has to offer, what the government of the day has to offer, and all those kind of stuff. So the affected communities are yet to assume a meaningful position at the negotiating table. And there's still a lot to talk about when it comes to what the Joint Declaration, for example, offers. But the fact that we have gotten to this point where there's a joint declaration that we are discussing, I think is something worth celebrating. So the joint declaration, with all its limits, with all its pitfalls, is something. The fact that we have gotten to that, at least, is encouraging. But being that as it may, a lot of work remains to be done. Fritzen, I gave you a promise that I would speak for exactly 25 minutes. And I think I will keep that promise and stop here. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Ellison, for such an informative presentation. I myself, I must admit, I learned a lot. Although Namibia is not so far away from us, but very little is, on the medium about the country. You mentioned very well when you were studying, the issue of genocide. Although, the Namibian genocide was, the first genocide that we know about, and some historians actually say that it was the fabric of the genocide that happened later on in Europe. The Holocaust of the Jewish. So it was a testing ground for, if and in the lack of the better word, of what was going to happen later on. Um, the floor is open now for interaction, and everybody's welcome to ask questions, but not only that, but also to share experiences. But on my side, I have a question. You mentioned that the land issue, and in South Africa, the land questions is very politicized. It's a sensitive issue, but it's a very politicized issue. The EFF has got a very strong stand on that. The ANC has got a stand as well, and the DA obviously has got its own stand, and so on and so on. There's no way that, in every and single elections, be it local, national, the land question is central. Is it the same in Namibia? Do you feel that the land issue uh, gets that the centrality that can be compared to the centrality that it gets here in South Africa? I'm just trying to bring an example that is closer to me. It's at least that's one question. And I've got other questions, but maybe I'll read out some questions that were from our asked by our friends and partners attending the event, participant attendees. I think I've got first question was from Shirley. Shirley's from the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center here. She said, "You went to school. Did you go to school in Namibia? And was the genocide not taught as part of the syllabus? And are the Herero and Nama communities part of the mainstream community, or they are still, or they are marginalized?" So that's another question. And we also have Janine. I think, well, I'm not sure if Janine is.
Fredson,
Yes, please.
yeah, with your permission, if we could probably
Yeah.
take three at a time,
Good.
because
Yeah.
otherwise I would,
Yeah. Sorry for that.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, please. Yeah, please go ahead.
yeah. So let me take these three. Whether the Nama and the Hero are marginalized, I think it depends on what you mean with that. So politically, I would say they do not form a sizable political constituency. So to use Tambo Becky's phrase of voting cows, there are not enough voting cows in terms of the crude numbers. So, and in that sense, you could say that they are relatively politically marginalized. But of course, there are other marginalized groups in a country, economically, socially, and otherwise. Yeah, so I think that will be my response to the issue of marginalization. Your question, Fredson, on the land question and how central it is. We have had two national land conferences. The first one a year after independence in 1991. And then the second one not long ago in 2018. And these are like huge conferences that invite various actors to deliberate on what needs to be done about the land question. So at least I think I would argue that there seems to be some intimation that the land question is a sticky issue of contemporary Namibian society. And even if you go back to history, in terms of what the fight was all about, the fight against colonialism. Land, of course, was central to that. So at least at that basic kind of national level, one would argue that the land question indeed has been given some kind of primacy. The fact that people, convened immediately after independence to talk about the land question in 1991, um, at least to me, signals that it is or it remains a very important issue. But when it comes to the intervention that have been put in place by the government in terms of land redistribution, I think that's where we have got things a bit wrong. So it seems to me that for as long as you are a Black Namibian, you are all the kind of things that I can think about. So even if you did not lose any land, if you have got the right connection to the corridors of power, you would probably be the first to get land while you are not the one who lost land. Genocide is part of the curriculum. What I have observed over the last couple of years now, again, because of the issue of genocide now coming in the public domain, public discourse, public imagination, that now you would find genocide in history textbooks. But during my time, and I mean, I was in high school from 99 up to around 2003, which is quite recent. There was no mention of genocide whatsoever in the history textbooks. But as I said, that is changing. And now the curriculum is being accommodative of all these various aspects of the Namibian history. And also just to mention this, when I came to the University of Namibia as a student and I was here from 2004 to 2007, again, I was never taught about genocide. So today there is a course that I teach at fourth year level, Advanced Sociology of Namibian Society. And I've been quite very deliberate in terms of including a theme on genocide because at least I have that latitude to, include a theme that I think is worthy of interrogating as something that is topical and relevant to the Namibian society. So I've been including that theme on genocide since I think I started teaching at the University of Namibia. Okay, let me stop there and allow Fredson to shoot 3 more questions.
Yes, there are more questions here from our participants. Janine, for example, she says, thank you for your interesting presentation. And given the context, what's your assessment about the planned hydrogen production in Namibia, especially with regards to the land question and democratic procedures? And we have Nikita. Nikita is asking you to talk more about the politics of memory and how it plays out in the relationship between different communities today. Maybe I'll read the third one and you will take it from there. So Lerato asks, do you think that the entire region within SADC should launch or call for a case for expropriation without compensation? Yeah, those are the 3 questions. You can also, I think you also can read from the chat here. Yes, Dr. Ellison, yeah?
Okay, yeah, thanks. Thanks for the questions. The plant, this green hydrogen fever, if you like, I think it has already started to cause some concerns. There is a place in Namibia in the very southern part called Lodret. And in Lodret, there was a concentration camp of the prisoners of war of 1904, 1908, so the Herero and the Nama. Um, and part of the concentration camp was very close to the ocean. So now, as part of the green hydrogen plant infrastructure and the like, there has been this talk of expanding the terminal, that handle um, ships and the like, that will then, of course, be used to transport hydrogen, principally to European markets. That this expansion could somewhat extend over an area where some either, human remains or where the concentration camp was and all this kind of stuff. So already you have got, those kind of issues in terms of how do you then balance, say, development that will probably benefit the country? Yes. How do you balance that against issues of memory and uh, uh, how, for example, building or expanding a terminal port over sacred spaces, if you like, would how would that be taken by the affected communities who are still fighting for reparations? So there are already some issues, and so thanks for that question on green hydrogen. So I think that's what I can say about that, insofar as it relates to genocide or to the land question in a greater scheme of things. The politics of memory. Um, I think the fact that the whole issue of negotiating for reparations or negotiating genocide with Germany started way, way late. Um, tells you something about um, what politics of memory does. So I would argue that the issue of genocide was, for the most part, um, made invisible. And whether that was deliberate or not is another question. Um, but perhaps to add a bit on the issue of politics of memory, I would again go back to the argument of the Independence Memorial Museum. The Independence Memorial Museum uh, is constructed over an area here in Windhoek that was also once a concentration camp of the prisoners of war of 1904 to 1908. But if you go there, that particular fact that, the space on which this museum sits was once a concentration camp, that fact doesn't hit you in the face. What you see instead, as you are just, entering the museum from the northern side, you see a huge statue of Sam Nujoma, who is the founding president of independent Namibia. Um, uh, yeah, so that gives you a sense of, what politics of memory does. Um, and I think the fact that Namibian politics, to a great extent, is ethnically organized. History then becomes important. So the ruling party, which is predominantly Awambo, would ordinarily, I would argue, um, privilege and, kind of elevate the history of, for example, SWAPO party and its predecessor, the Ovambo People Organization. So you have got those dynamics that then get to define as to what becomes important politically and what gets to be remembered. So, the whole question of this struggle of power and memory, yeah. So I think I would stop there on the politics of memory. Uh, the question on whether the entire region should mobilize for expropriation without compensation. Um, that's a tough one. I don't know if examples of expropriation without compensation have yielded any encouraging results. So, but we have to have a serious discussion in terms of how we go about these, um, historical injustices, about this land inequality that continue to define a great deal of Southern Africa. So we can't just bury our heads in the sand. The problem is not going to go away, and for as long as we do not decisively deal with it, it will remain a social time bomb. So, but I'm not so encouraged about expropriation without compensation. Um, but at the same time, the more we don't do anything about the land question, the more likely it will get to the issue of expropriation without compensation, perhaps maybe in a very chaotic and, violent way. So, but we really need to have a serious discussion. But just kicking people off the land, yeah, there is, and there is a context that is also very constraining in terms of what is it that you can do and cannot do. Um, so yeah, it's a bit difficult. It's a bit difficult to say. Um, yeah, and I think this whole issue of expropriation without compensation should be a different talk altogether. That just focuses on that. I think it's really broader than we think, and there are a lot of things that we need to consider. Fredson, back to you.
Yeah, we have more questions. Let me read them out to you. Second. Yeah, we have a question from Sunny Morgan. My name is Sunny Morgan of the Movement of Debt and Reparations. So is there any civil society organizations working on reparations, or this topic is only in the ambit of politicians and the ruling elite? So Sunny has another question. I think, let me just read it to you now. In current reparation negotiation, has a value or a quantum amount been agreed upon yet, or is that still far off in the future? And then Milisão Nuvunga from Mozambique. Milisão says in Mozambique, we have a number of episodes of mass violence committed by the colonial powers against the Black populations, labeled as massacres. Is there a debate, and are there empirical examples of the legal and material differences between colonial massacres and genocides in Namibia? So yeah, these are the three questions for now. Ellison, hello?
Yes, I'm with you, Fredson. Thank you. I was just noting this down.
Yeah.
Such that I'm
Yeah,
able to organize my thoughts. So I think I will start in reverse. I
yeah.
would start with my is it brother or sister from Mozambique?
It's a brother, yeah.
Yeah, about colonial massacres and genocide. So if you read about genocide and the literature in international human rights law, with genocide, there is that intention, that intent to, wipe out, kill in whole or in part a particular, community or ethnic grouping or race or whatever it is. So when it comes to the Namibian genocide, there were what do you call this? There were some kind of declarations that were made by uh, colonial officers in the German, colonial military regime that said, we are targeting this particular group of people, and wherever they are seen, they must be, massacred, or they must be exterminated. So yes, I was looking for the word extermination and it was just evading me. So there were extermination orders that were issued, and these are things of historical record. If you read about the Namibian history and the history of 1904 to 1908 genocide, you will come across these things. It was stated like, wherever a Herero is, what, he must be killed or must be shot on sight. So I think that's a clear distinction between, colonial violence or massacres that happens in that process, as opposed to a colonial authority issuing an extermination order to wipe out a particular group of people. So that's what happened in relation to the Nama and Herero genocide. In terms of the quantum has not yet been agreed upon. There was an offer by the German government, which was contained in the joint declaration in 2021, and I think it was 1.8 billion euros, and of course that was rejected, as it's just ridiculous and it's peanuts. But there has been rounds of negotiations over the last couple of years, and it appears that the quantum is still being negotiated. So and it appears that the German government is prepared to increase what they offered in 2021. So but we are not yet at an agreed upon quantum. Whether civil society organizations exist that advocate for reparations or that speak around this issue of genocide, or whether it is a government dominated topic. There are some groupings that are particularly linked to traditional authorities of the affected communities that continue to agitate around the issue of genocide. So there exists a genocide foundation, or Herero Nama Genocide Foundation. So yeah, there are those kind of organizations that are also linked to part of the affected communities that are in the diaspora. So like people in Botswana, where some of the Hereros fled, and also South Africa. So there are these organizations that exist. Fredson, back to you again.
Yes. Okay, let me read out maybe the last 10 of questions, because, yeah, I'm sure you are a little bit tired now, but there's another question. Sylvia. Sylvia is a lecturer. It's part of the lecturer section of German section. University of Namibia, and a Namibia citizen. And she said, aside from monetary reparations and land redistribution, what else is necessary, in your opinion, to overcome the generational trauma of genocide? And in your opinion, what constructive contribution can Namibians of German descent make? So is there any contribution that Namibians from German descent make, and how constructive it is? And also you maybe to also try to touch a little bit of generational trauma, how to overcome that. And there's one more question again from Sunny, which I also find very interesting. It has to do with what mechanisms exist for a revolutionary interpretation of compensation. And he or she, I'm not so sure, I'm sorry for that, says that my movement thinks that we can link reparations to debt cancellation. Do you think that's feasible? I mean, linking reparation to debt cancellation?
What else is necessary to overcome the intergenerational trauma? Um, I wish there was a psychologist in the house who can help us with that question of trauma. Um, but I think there are some practical things that we can do. Um, and maybe I would try and respond to that question in relation to something such as um, graves of, say, um, great grandparents of those who were, affected by the genocide. Some of these graves remain in white people farms. And sometimes if you have to go and perform some, I don't know, rituals, or you want to go and connect with the ancestors, like some of us who, communicate with the ancestors, you have to ask permission from Sylvia, for example. Sylvia, can I please enter your farm to go and visit my grandparents' grave? And Sylvia has the authority to refuse me entry, those kind of stuff. So, but again, if there was a psychologist, maybe they would have assisted with that question more competently than I can. But I think there is a need to have meaningful conversations, the affected communities and the German-speaking Namibians. For a very long time, the Germans or Namibians of German descent or German-speaking Namibians have not really been part of, discussions around the issue of genocide, around the issue of land, while they are, of course, the beneficiaries of what happened more than 100 years ago. So they are beneficiaries of land theft. But when people are talking about the land question, land inequality, for a very long time, the Germans here in Namibia have been very absent, have not been part of that conversation. But this has changed, I think, lately. I think in 2021, a forum for German-speaking Namibians was established, and from what I read, part of their mandate is to bring about, mutual coexistence, to somewhat also talk about these issues that continue to confront the Namibian society. So there are some good signs that things are now coming to a point where Germans here in Namibia come to the realization that they need to start the conversation. So I'm not so sure if they did that out of good faith and free will, or whether they realize that the longer we remain quiet around this, the more dangerous it's gonna get, and concerning issues of land grabbing and all those kind of stuff. So there's some things happening around that. Reparation to debt cancellation. Um, I'm not so gravitated towards that way of thinking. I mean, look, if you say debt cancellation, so suppose Germany, I mean Namibia owes Germany money as state to state. Okay, someone here says Namibian debt is currently around 16 billion euros. So 60, who does the Namibia owe? Is it Germany? Anyway, so probably the person who asked the question would qualify what he or she meant. But what I'm saying is, if you cancel a debt that is owed by a state and or Namibian government in this instance, and money that they probably um, borrowed was used for things that have got nothing to do with people who suffered genocide. So um, I don't think that's gonna work. Yeah, I think that will be my response to that. So I'm not, yeah, the thing they principally owe China money. Yeah. No, to me, I don't think to me that won't fly. It's an argument that I think won't do justice or deliver justice to those who were affected by genocide. Because now you're saying, okay, Namibia's debt is now, cancelled because Germany committed war, and then and the money that Namibia owes, I don't know, part of the money was used to buy farms that were given to some political elites that didn't lose any land, or was used for some roads in northern Namibia where the affected communities are not, found. So I'm not so drawn to that argument of linking reparation to debt cancellation. Mechanism for a revolutionary interpretation of reparation. I don't know, honestly. I don't know how that would look like. Um, and again, perhaps if the person who posed the question um, can offer an explanation of what that would look like, and then maybe I can comment to that. But yeah, from the question as it is, I honestly just don't know. Fredson, back to you again.
Sorry, I'd said that was the last set of questions, but maybe two more. From Roland. Roland is our colleague here. Is asking where do traditionally marginalized people like the San, the Overhimba, etc., and conservancies feature in the land reform debate? And secondly, do you see Bernard as Swakboy, if I'm not reading correctly the name, Landless People's Movement, using the stalled land reform process to challenge SWAPO's hegemony? Is the Landless People's Movement challenging SWAPO's hegemony using the land reform question? I think it links to my question about the politicization of the land issue, how much politicized this question is. And also from our friend from Mozambique, Olga Mutambe, she says, we had, it's an interesting presentation in Mozambique. We had also genocides and in the colonial area. However, we cannot compare these two actors with the atrocity that it's happening in Cabo Delgado, and the communities are being forced to abandon land and the territory, so they are traumatized. I think Olga just wanted to share that comment because I know Olga works for Ikone, and Ikone works a lot on trauma-related issues in Cabo Delgado. It's just a comment that, and so in this regard, you only left with one question from Roland. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Fredson. I will attempt to answer this. I think there are actually two, and then yeah,
two in one, yes.
Yes, I didn't get myself any cup of water or something, so my mouth
Oh,
actually.
sorry.
No worries, no.
Sorry.
Okay, so when it comes to marginalized communities such as say the San people and issue around conservancies, um, it seems to me that those issues are somewhat marginal in terms of how the land question has been approached. But nonetheless, if you look at the resolutions that were taken at the first land conference, and particularly the second land conference in 2018, some of these issues are in there. But it appears that, when it comes to land, and I think it's also because of its relation to the issue of genocide, you get a sense that, of course, the Ovaherero and Nama have been the most loudest. They are the ones who really agitate around the land question. And you look at the San people, for example. I mean, the first inhabitants of the sub-region, Southern Africa, they are conspicuously absent in terms of this debate, and I think that's very unfortunate. And sometimes when you raise this issue, I mean, I do raise this issue of the San people at public platforms, and also with my students when we are talking about the land question, like where are the San people in the land question? And sometimes what you hear is that, okay, us as Vaherero or Nama, we are fighting for our people, we are fighting our battles. So we recognize that the San people are also an integral part of, of all those debates around the land question, but it's like, they should argue their case, because we have enough problems of our own. I don't know if that is productive in the long run, but I think I do have an appreciation of the fact that some of the marginalized communities who should really be at the center of the land question are somewhat on the margins. Yes, the landless people movement, I think, have been doing very well around the land question, and they really argue from well-researched kind of arguments, and yes, you can say to some extent that they have been taking the land question seriously in terms of taking on SWAPO, and I think it's an issue that that is very important, and that is politically relevant. So, and you realize that over time, the SWAPO-led government seem to have, for lack of a better phrasing, seem to have failed in terms of land redistribution, in terms of the land question. So, yeah, I think that's enough on the land question and LPM. It's an election year. The next thing you would hear people saying, Ellison was campaigning for LPM. So, Fredson, I would leave it there, and yeah, bring it back to you.
Okay, sorry.
Fredson, I think you are.
Yes, yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for your presentation. You shared some very, very, insightful information about what's happening, about the relationship between the land question, inequality, and the democracy and the struggle for democracy of Namibia. So thank you very much. I would like to appreciate also my colleagues here at the Rosa-Luxemburg Foundation, everyone for helping in setting up this series of debates that we are organizing. And I would like also to invite you to continue following this series of debates. But before that, that next week we're going to have a discussion. It's not necessarily part of this debate, but it has to do with the political economy of energy transition. That's next week. And then we will be sharing with you more interesting debates that we are going to be running this year. Please don't miss all those interesting debates. Thank you, Siviwe, my colleague from Comms. Thank you, Siko. Thank you, Roland. Thank you, Janine. And thank you, everyone who attended this event. We will keep in touch. We will be sharing with you more interesting event. Dr. Ellison, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Fredson. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And
Bye-bye.
thanks to the participants.
Thank you.